Okay, well, it's 1 o'clock, so let's get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Stephanie Hagstrom, and I'm the Director of Community Development at the Research Data Alliance, US, and I'm the host of today's webinar titled Making Data Discoverable Through Publishing Structured Metadata on the Web. Before we get started with the presentation today, I have a bit of information to share with you about RDA. Oh, wait, I'm not sharing my slides. Excuse me. Can you see my slides? Okay, here we go. I have some housekeeping information and some information about the webinar. So the Research Data Alliance is a global community of over 12,861 data experts from 148 countries who collaborate and build the social and technical bridges to enable open sharing and the reuse of data. Members of the RDA come through self-formed focused working groups, exploratory interest groups, and communities of practice, COPs, which are, sorry, my dog's barking in the background, groups to exchange knowledge and discoveries. They discuss barriers and potential solutions and define policies and test standards. Many of the 88 active groups have produced outputs to enhance and facilitate global data sharing and reuse. Oy, sorry about that. The RDA has 30 national groups that support initiatives of the RDA members of those regions by providing a platform to interact on a global level. Those national groups may be individual countries or a group of countries. As an example, there's a region of Americas that includes all countries within North America and Latin America. There are also 5 contributing regions: Australia, Canada, the EU, France, and the United States, who each provide the resources to support and sustain the RDA global operations. The RDA US is one of the recognized regions with over 2,650 RDA members. In addition to providing resources to sustain the global operations, the RDA US also supports the RDA global community by hosting and coordinating community activities, including this webinar series featuring working and interest group outputs. We also host a podcast series, which features interviews and discussions with group co-chairs with newly endorsed groups. And we also host a series in Latin America as a way to introduce the RDA community there. In addition to the 5 contributing regions, there are also 58 organizational members who also contribute to the RDA global operations and 12 affiliate members that support the RDA in a variety of ways. Today's webinar will be translated from English into French and Spanish. If you wish to listen to a translation of this webinar, you may select the globe at the bottom of your Zoom control screen and join that room. We'll also be recording today's webinar in English, French, and Spanish, and we will add those links to the recordings on the RDA website, probably by end of day tomorrow. We have allocated time at the end of the webinar for questions. We do ask that you please use the Q&A section of your Zoom panel so that we have a recording of the questions. We will not be using raised hands or chat today. If there are more questions that are available to answer, we will be transferring those unanswered questions to a document, and we will send the answers to all of you following the webinar. Okay, so I think that's it for housekeeping. Thank you for listening. I'm going to turn the slides over to Mingfang, who's running the slides, but for Layla to introduce the webinar and speakers. I'll stop sharing my screen right now.
Yes, hello everybody. Stephanie, thank you very much for the introduction. And let's going to start our session for today. We are going to present some of the main outputs from the research metadata schemas group that recently finished its work. So today we have 2 co-chairs of this working group. First, we will have Mingfang Wu from the Australian Research Data Commons, as you can imagine, in Australia. She is there a senior research data specialist, and she leads data discovery projects for making data discoverable by both machines and human users. The second speaker today will be myself. My name is Leila Yael Castro. I am from CERVEMET Information Center for Life Sciences in Cologne, in Germany, and I am leading here the Semantic Technologies team. We work in research and development. We combined data analytics, semantic technologies, and machine learning for knowledge discovery, mostly based on literature. And we work also on information retrieval and recommendation systems. If you can go to the next slide, Ming, please, we will move to the agenda for today. So as you can see, we already had the introduction to RDA and RDS US, and we introduce the presenters. Remember, please, to use the question and answers for any of your questions. No chat, no raise hands. We will have some presentations. The first one will be an introduction to the working group and structured metadata. Ming will develop this topic. Then I will come back with you to show you the guidelines to publish structured metadata on websites. And then we will go back to Ming, who will be showing the crosswalks and some of the toolings that were collected in the group. And she will also talk a little bit about the adoption of these guidelines. We will then move to a question and answers. Once again, please remember to use the Q&A rather than the chat or the raise hands, because we will only be monitoring the Q&A. I will be moderating that, and we will finish again with Stefan. So I'm going to say, Ming, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leila, for your introduction, and thanks to Stephanie and RDA US for organizing this webinar, and everyone to join us today. Where I'm going to introduce the Research Metadata Schemas Working Group. I talk about motivation, objective, and the output of this working group. Okay, the motivation for this working group is to address data discovery issue. In the past 10 years or so, we have developed probably thousands of online data repositories and a catalog. And much effort has been invested to make metadata and data fair, the findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So we can support open science and data-driven research. It's a good thing we have these repositories to make data and metadata openly available, but they come an issue of data discovery. Every repository tends to become a data island. It's harder for researchers or data seekers to discover data, moving island to island. Researchers have to do berry picking here and there for required data sets. So while in current research environment, the research tend to do cross disciplines and at group scale. So they, in many cases, need a data set from multiple repositories. So ideally, we needed to provide data seeker a better discovery experience by joining up data discovery. With just one search box for searching all research data repositories, just like WordCat, a Union library catalog. This catalog make it easier to search the word library from one easy search box. So for joined up data discovery, repositories need to speak the same language when communicating. So we need a common metadata schemas or framework for repository to translate their direct to. So these common metadata schemas this working group is looking at is vocabularies from schema.org. It's light way to approach the semantics. It has collection of shared vocabulary for structured data. It's simple to be implemented, but it permits complex things to be possible. In research communities, we use vocabularies for for measurement, for variables that's possible and to be implemented in structured data. And this structured data will be understandable by both humans and machines. So because of this advantage, this schema.org markup has been published and used by many major sites on the web and to mark up news, books, finance, e-commerce, also by research communities to mark up learning resource and library catalogs. Here is an example of structured metadata. On the left side is a landing page of metadata. That's markup in HTML text for presenting that metadata for human consumption. On the right side, it's encoded the same information as displayed on the left side, but markup in the structured way so machine can read and process that further. So if the repositories can map their schemas to a common frame and embedded that metadata in a structured way in web page, that enable many applications to happen. So by doing this, primarily we enhance interoperability across data catalog, but potentially a new method for metadata content syndication among repositories. So metadata is there on the web for everyone crawl and consume. And it enables the discovery by provide, you can enable federated search across repositories of specific domain or related domain relevant to a research need. And also support a spectrum of data search applications or need from text search, JSON API to Spark queries. So with that motivation, this group was set up to bring together communities who are working with such vocabularies from schema.org to describe research data and related resources. And we're trying to identify gaps in existing schema commonly for research data. And to implement this structured metadata, it requires consistent implementation at a semantic and the syntactic level. So we also try to provide guidelines for those communities whose needs are not addressed by existing schema, such as schema.org, and provide guidelines on proposing extensions. So we planned 3 outputs. One is data model, and the work we have done is we collect a collection of crosswalks. And the second output is produce a guideline document, and Leila will talk about it soon. And the third output is tooling, so to help people make the process of publishing structured data easier. Okay, with that, we will start to introduce the group's output. I hand over to Leila to introduce the guideline.
So hi again, everybody. Let's go into see what are the guidelines for publishing a structured metadata on the web that we produce in our working group. Ming, if we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this is the recommended output that we created. We first identified a challenge, we identified a solution, and we pondered somehow what the impact could be. This is the way that recommended outputs are commonly presented in RDA. So maybe you have seen some other of these cards, summary cards. So what was the challenge? The challenge was publishing structured metadata on the web in such a way that we find coherence across different ways. And why do we want this coherence and this consistency? Because it will make it easier for aggregators or for anyone in general to reuse the structured metadata provided in there. And also because it will increase the fairness, as in findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable of the resources in the web. So what was the solution? We created these guidelines for publishing structured metadata on the web, and we use schema.org as the baseline metadata schema. And what is the impact? This will have an impact in data repositories and data aggregators. And we really hope that this will make it easier for data publishers to be fairer and to have some common ground for them to publish structured metadata on the web. Next slide, please. So in summary, the guidelines cover the whole process for publishing structured metadata, and they have as a goal to ensure consistent implementation across different data repositories. The intended audience for these guidelines are people working with data repositories, but also with data aggregators, publishers that want to expose their metadata, and also in general, we want to contribute to the fairness of the resources on the web. Next slide. Thanks. So now we have our 9 guidelines for publishing structured metadata on the web. The first thing is knowing why you want to publish structured metadata on the web. You need to have a goal, and you need to have clarity on that goal, on that purpose. Then you need to identify which resources you want to add. You could have data sets, but you could also have data catalogs or data repositories. Maybe you also have software or any other sort of data, any other sort of digital object that you want to publish. And all of them are very important, following the FAIR principles, should be identified with a persistent global unique identifier. It could be that you already have some metadata schema, but it doesn't align with schema.org yet. So the idea would be to create a crosswalk or to see if someone else has already created a crosswalk for the vocabulary that you use. One of the other outputs that will be presented today is a series of crosswalk between schema.org and some other vocabulary. Very important is that in some communities, you will find that they use control vocabularies, ontologies, for instance, to describe very specific elements to the community, to the domain. So it's important that you are aware of it, and if necessary, you can incorporate external vocabularies. It's very important also that you implement the markup in a consistent way. For instance, if you are working with languages and in your community EN is used for English, then always use EN. But maybe in some other community, they use 3 letters, ENG. So just go with it. Go with your community. In the same way that you are friendly to your community, you should also be friendly to web crawlers. So the machines can interpret, can take your metadata, and then it will be easier for them to aggregate or to show summaries, for instance. One of the approaches here would be to add a sitemap, and the persistent identifiers are also important in here. The other guideline is using available tools. You don't have to start all over. You don't have to start from the scratch. You don't have to start from zero. Just go and see what is already available. Maybe something to validate your markup is already available for your community or for your domain. Document every step. And if you can share that documentation, even better, because it will be easier for others to understand what you are providing, how you are providing it, and why it is the goal that you have by providing this structured metadata. And find a community that is related to your domain or is related to the sort of digital objects that you use. Let's go in to see a little bit more in detail some of these guidelines. Let's go into see a little bit about the fourth guideline, incorporating external vocabularies, implementing the markup syntax, and joining a community. Next slide, please. So here we are seeing metadata markup. So it's code. We are using JSON here. On the left, you are seeing keywords, just geology or soil sciences. On the right, you are seeing, according to this community, a better way to say what you are talking about. In this case, we are talking about earth sciences. So they use this vocabulary, linked data gov AU, and they are saying that soil sciences is actually defined in this vocabulary. The code in this vocabulary is 0503, and they have the link to the actual identifier for this vocabulary. And you see that you are doing this consistently. So you have all your keywords defined by defined terms. This is the way in Schema.org to talk about external vocabularies. So you are consistent in the way, and you are following some community standards in here. Next one, yes, thank you. So in here, it is also important that you understand what your community is expecting from you. We saw just the example about how to use vocabularies that are recommended by a particular community, but we can also see, for instance, that a particular community will want to see what is the variable measured in a data set. So when you present the data set, maybe not everybody all around the world uses this variable measure. However, if your community is saying, look, it is very important for us to use and always expose this variable measure, so we really recommend you to use it. And maybe they even offer a validator that will look into this particular detail, well, you better use it. So you are accomplishing with the standards of your community. Next slide. Now let's going to look a little bit more about using available tools. So here we have a spreadsheet about some tools that are available around that will make your life easier. We have already mentioned some of these possible tooling, for instance, to validate your data. If your community says this is the very minimum that we are expecting you to provide, and this is recommended and this is optional, those validators will be able to parse your structured metadata and see whether you are complying with the minimum, with the recommended, with the optional. Some of them could combine the validation of the structured metadata with fairness. So they could offer also fair evaluators. And some of them maybe even have some generators for you to having a starting point in order to populate the structured metadata on your website. We have here a short URL that you can see, so you can go in more detail and find more information about these supporting tools. Next slide. Now we are going to see a collection of metadata crosswalks that, as I mentioned, could be necessary for you to organize your structured metadata on your website. Ming, please continue. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Leila. One recommendation from the guideline is to map as many properties from our repository schemas to schema.org. So for that purpose, we collected across existing crosswalks, trying to help communities with their mappings. So here is the output card for the collection of crosswalks. I will talk a little more about that in the next few slides. So so the process, we collecting and align up those crosswalk. So when we started this working group, we instrumented a survey on current practice in using schema describe dataset. That survey was distributed to the group members and beyond. There are 22 organizations participated survey. We collected 13 crosswalk from the survey, and we also added 2 publicly available crosswalks. So those crosswalk were done by not by us, but by communities. This crosswalk, including DCAT version 2 and DCAT application profile, ISO 19115, datasite, dataverse, etc. You can see their schemas from discipline first and general schemas. And we have 15 of them mapping from these schemas to schema.org. So what we did is we first align up those crosswalks to schema.org terms, then further analyzed those crosswalks. So here is a spreadsheet shows how we align up those crosswalk to schema.org. So in total, there are 385 properties from 15 crosswalks that being mapped to the 40 schema.org properties. So thanks to the International Technology Office, Karen Pang, who put resources to develop these visualization tools. So, so if you want to do the mapping, you could choose a property. Here, for example, publishers, you can see which source schemas have that property and how that's mapped to different schemas. So if you are interested, please go and follow the link and play around. So we did a further analysis of crosswalks to identify gaps in using schema.vocabularies to describe research data. So we categorized the mapped term into the 6 categories by National Information Standard Organization. The 6 categories: descriptive metadata, technical metadata, rights metadata, preservation metadata, and structured metadata. So here, the number in the bracket indicate how many source schemas have that term or vocabulary, and the fund in italic is the one from schema.org. So here is a summary from the analysis. So descriptive metadata are mostly interoperable among the schemas and can be mapped to schema.org property. And that's because schema.org was originally for the web discovery purpose. So descriptive metadata are mostly covered. And the rights metadata is most inconsistent across source schemas. Those schemas use different terms to express the right. And also larger gaps exist in structured metadata and controlled vocabularies for specifying various property values. So those are kind of vocabularies or gaps from those unmapped terms from source schemas. So we hope this crosswalk collection can assist, and visualization tools can be used as a reference for data repositories when they develop their own crosswalk, or for projects they develop common metadata schemas. And these analysis and the collection provide important insight into semantic interoperability of metadata schemas currently used by for research data. So I talk a little bit more about adoption. So when we did the crosswalk, we hope that will help data repositories to do the mapping. But after we post that crosswalk for community review, we had a few unexpected adoption or use cases. A few groups have used this crosswalk collection to train and test automated semantic mapping tools. Here are 4 examples. You can follow the link to look at those examples. And adoption for the guideline. So the use case or adopters, they joined the group from the beginning and contributed to the guideline development. Adopters, for example, the ARDC through me participation, and NASA National Slough and Ice Data Centers through the Julia Collins, and Observatory de Paris through Baptiste. And yeah, so we actively participate in the development of the guideline. So the guideline has 9 recommendations. So adoption, sometimes partially adoption, and also is ongoing work, because to implement the structured metadata require resources, and a repository may take a step at a time. That's we introduced the group, we introduced output. We would like to thank all people who contribute to this work. This group is co-chaired by Leila and me here, and also Adam Sarula. Unfortunately, they cannot make it here today, but there are so many people helped us to develop the guideline and the crosswalk, the toolings, and the people from advisory group, Doug, Nick, and Rose. They all actively contribute to each output. I wasn't able to read all the names, but just put on record. And also the photos and the referrals, they have to set up the working group, and a lot of people who contribute to the planning and present to the group's plenary session. And thank you all. Without you, and this work cannot happen. So this group, actually formally started at the plenary 14, and we finished our work at the plenary 18. Since then, we transferred in maintenance mode, and we are now think of ways to wrap it up. That's it. Leila, I'm hand over to you now.
Thank you, Ming. So let's go in to start our question and answer session. There are two questions that have been already answered. I'm just going to inform what they were about. One question about the DOI. So we type the answer. So you should all be able to see the answer to those questions. We put there the DOI to the guidelines and also the link to the supporting tools, the spreadsheet that we presented as part of the guidelines. There was another question, will the slides be available later online somewhere? The answer is yes, we already answered that question, just typing the answer. And we put in there the information on where you can find the slides. The recording will also be available. Now let's go to some live answers. We have two questions in here. I'm going to read the first one. What are the most compelling reasons that you would present to a vendor or repository platform to start providing schema metadata? I'm going to provide my answer and maybe Ming can complement this. So I'm going to start with the first guideline. What is the purpose of the markup that you want to provide? You need to have this clear. Otherwise, it doesn't matter how compelling the reasons that someone else, someone external is presenting you. You just will not care. If a doctor tells you, look, take the medicine, but you simply don't trust on it, you will not take it, regardless of the very good reasons to take it. So this is more or less what I would say, kind of an analogy that we can find. Now, what would be some reasons that you could use for people kind of looking at the possibility of providing a schema markup? One is somehow it has become a de facto standard for so many different digital objects on the web. If you go to any of the major search engines nowadays, you might find out that they are showing you a summary. If you look for a movie, for instance, you will see not only results about that movie, but a small summary telling you who was the director, what are the main characters or the main actors, whether it was based on a book, what other similar movies are. Those summaries are coming from a structured metadata. For research purposes, you might have heard about a dataset Google search engine, and there you can find datasets that are used in research. They are crawling the schema metadata that these websites are providing in order to create a disaggregation of research-based datasets. Also, you could find that it is what your community is expecting from you. So you will have, I would say that community reasons are very compelling reasons, but of course, it might be or not depending on what you want to support or what you can provide. Another reason is that you will not interfere with the end user experience of your website, because you can inject JSON LD. JSON is a format that it is used for these structured metadata on the web. And you can do this via programmatic means. So you first render the page for the end user, and then later you render the schema structured metadata. Those are the reasons that I imagine right now. I don't know, Ming, do you have any comments on this question?
Yes, I think you you talk about all those good reasons, and to publish structured metadata, make them discoverable and improve researchers' data discovery experience, but also that could simplify the ways repositories feed metadata or harvest metadata from other repositories. I give example, partners, data partners of us, they usually, we harvest their metadata through OER APMH. They also feed metadata to other repository as well, but they are implementing the structured metadata. So they come talk to us, say, now we are doing this, publishing structured metadata. We don't want to keep the, Apache for that OER PMH anymore. Could you just harvest our metadata from, from embedded structured metadata? So that's probably simplify the ways for repositories to harvest or feed metadata to other repositories. It can reduce, say, if there are 10 downstream repositories harvest your metadata, you probably need 10 mappings at maximum. But if all just for the general data discovery purpose, then probably you can reduce that 10 into 1.
Thanks. You, Ming. We have a second question in here. What is the most significant hurdle if they are already providing metadata that maps to data site metadata? Ming, I'm going to leave the answer with you.
Sorry, I was looking at a chat. So people hands raise up hands. Could you put your question into the QA? If you have any questions. Sorry, Leila, what was the question? Oh, how do you evaluate the increase in visibility, discoverability, and other?
No, that is the next one. We are still on the previous one. What is the most significant hurdle if they are already providing metadata that maps to data site?
Okay, so the significant hurdles, if you already map metadata to data site metadata, so I wouldn't think they're that difficulty because data site can harvest the structured metadata from schema.org. If you go to data site, you can see the offset option. So if you already map to data site, I think it's easier to do the mapping to the schema.org. So the collection of the crosswalk we collected has a mapping from data site to schema.org. If you from data site schema to schema.org, if you have a look what terms you mapped to the data site, you can check how that terms expressed in schema.org.
Thank you, Ming. I'm going to mark this question as answered live. And now we are going to move to the next question. How do you evaluate increase in visibility, discoverability of the data product? I'm going to give an answer and then I'm going to ask Ming to complement this. There are different ways to monitor the traffic on your website. So I would say that you should use what you regularly use for this. Google Analytics is a commonly used one, and then you will see whether you are getting more visits. So you are being more visible, more discoverable. you will need to include also some statistics or some monitoring for data bots, because if you are being aggregated by a data aggregator thanks to exposing the structured metadata on your website, you will not see that as a visit, but you will see it via data bots and so on. So you can keep statistics on these using the regular analytic tools for websites. Ming, do you want to add anything in here?
I think you cover well. No further comments.
So I'm going to mark these as answer live. Do we have any other question? Okay, yes, we do. Do you have a list of repositories that use your structured metadata schema? Ming, you were presenting adoption at the very end, so I will leave this answer with you.
Yes. So so for example, the RefCS Z1 that used by ARDC, Research Data Australia, you can go to our repository and pick a record. You can see from record, you can see how that structured metadata embedded. And also you can go to Data One, another repository. I think they have structured metadata implemented. There are quite a few. If you go to go to Google dataset search, you can see search any term of your interest. From those matched results, you can see quite a lot data repositories that have the structured metadata implementation.
Thanks, Ming. By the way, if you are a data provider and you are interested in implementing this structured metadata schema, and you need any help in there, you have any questions about the guidelines, you don't know how to start, we would be happy to hear from you. Now I'm going to mark this question as answer live, and now we are going to move to the next one. Are there security concerns for publishing metadata this way? I'm going to take this one. It is up to you what you expose as metadata on the web. So if there is anything that you don't want to expose, just don't do it, and then you are not showing something that you don't want to show. There is also some concerns, for instance, nowadays about being traced by some data aggregators that are kind of taking too much that they are willing to give away. There are some websites on research that will take all your metadata, but then will not make it accessible to third parties. And this is a concern that some researchers have, for instance. As far as I know, publishing the metadata will not have any implication in this, for instance. With the sitemap, you could, for instance, reduce or limit or restrict the pages that are actually crawled, because if they are not included in the sitemap, then the bots will not go in there. So this could be a way for you to avoid crawling in some specific pages if you don't want to. And this is kind of what comes to my mind right now. Ming, do you want to complement here?
No, that's all good. I think I think publish metadata in this way, there are no higher risk than you publish metadata in HTML page.
Thank you, Ming. So I'm going to mark this as answer live. Let's going to move to the next one. out of NIH GREI repositories, is there any repository that has more superior structured metadata schema? I'm going to say that I don't know what is the structured metadata schema used by NIH GREI repositories. I want to mention, though, that whether one metadata schema is superior or not to any other, it depends on the goal on each data provider. And it depends on the community that it is behind the website. This is how I would answer this. Mingfang, do you want to add anything?
No, you're quite right. It depends on the purpose. So yeah, I don't know what is any superior ones to the GREI. And it's all depend on purpose, but the structure is the way to present the or represent the schema. You know, probably you can encode the schema in XML. You know, that's readable, but not as more expressive as in, say, in JSON LD. So yeah, so we need to probably separate the schema and the structure. Yeah.
Thank you, Ming. I'm going to mark this answer live. We have another question that I will ask you, Ming, to please type the answer. What is the link to the visualizations for the crosswalk? So I think the link is easier if we type it in.
Yeah, so now I'm sharing the slides. I can go back and find the link. Okay.
Yeah, we will put the link in a moment then.
Yeah.
So the next question is, do we risk conflicts between DOI metadata and JSON LD metadata? I'm going to take that one and I'm going to say, I don't think so. For instance, Zenodo, that means DOIs, they also expose metadata using schema.org. Same for EuroPMC, and there is no conflict in there. They use JSON LD metadata for this, and they are using schema.org, but they also are crawled by Crossref, for instance, and these websites, particularly for scientific publications. So I'm not aware of any conflict in there. I'm going to mark this as answer live. And oh, okay, I think the next one is related to this and how would we manage these conflicts? Let's say that there is a conflict that could, a possible conflict in there, and is if you present different metadata via the publication metadata way and the JSON LD metadata. But it is up to the website that if they are presenting metadata following different metadata schemas, they should do these crosswalks that we have mentioned today to make sure that they are presenting consistent metadata regardless the schema that they are using. So that would be the manage to handle possible conflicts, just to make sure that you map the different schemas so you avoid them. It could be that some metadata schema would offer you something that you can express in one, but not in the other one. That is not a conflict. It will be just missing information depending on the metadata schema, but that would not be a conflict. And in any case, because all of them are structured metadata, there are ways to make different metadata schemas to talk to each other via the crosswalks. So because they will have the same persistent global unique identifier, regardless which metadata schema you are using, you could still have data aggregators that will map the metadata coming from one schema and the metadata coming from the other one, and they will join if there is anything missing in one of the two metadata schemas. I'm going to mark these two questions as answer live. And I think we don't have any other question. I can see that some people didn't have the chance to pose their questions because they didn't see the Q&A. I'm going to say that RDA technical team will be looking into it, maybe doing some more testing to make sure that for the next webinar, everybody can see the Q&A. Our apologies for this. We were not aware of it until, yeah, just a couple of minutes when we saw the comments on the chat. We don't have any other question. Okay, we don't have a question, but a comment providing information on the GREI repository for those of you that are interested in these metadata structures. So I'm just going to say answer live because it's more like a comment. And I think we can now hand it over to Stephanie, who is going to close the session. Thank you very much, Stephanie, for the invitation. Thank you very much, Ming, for all the information. And well, thank you all for participating and typing your questions. Thank you very much to all of you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ming. Wonderful questions. And I think we got them all answered, so we won't need to be sending anything to anyone. So I want to thank everyone for coming, and especially I want to thank you, Mingfang and Layla, for moderating and running the conference today, the webinar today, and the Research Metadata Schemas Working Group members who also participated in closing out this working group. I want to thank those behind the scenes, Megan and Rebecca from RDA US for providing technical support today, the Digital Research Alliance in Canada for arranging the French interpretation services, and thanks to our French interpreter, Yanitza Cornano. And I also want to thank Federico Citrangelo and Andrea Mona Campos of La Referencia for arranging the Spanish interpreter services today. And thanks to our Spanish interpreter, Roxana Gutierrez. As I mentioned earlier, the webinar is being recorded, and the slide deck will be available both on the RDA website webpage, and I posted that in the chat and in the Q&A. We do have one more webinar this year in this series, and that's put on by the DMP Common Standards Working Group, and it will be November 22nd. So mark your calendar for that one. We also have a podcast series, the RDA US hosts, and we've got 5 episodes up on our Podbean podcast platform. And we have one more coming in November, FAIR Principles for Research Hardware Interest Groups. And these are all the groups that are starting up. So listen to them. They need your help. Find out what they're planning and join those. And then the RDA plenary will be held March 21st through the 23rd. This is our 20th plenary. It'll be in Gothenburg, Sweden. There is limited seating. So once registration opens up, if you're planning on going, I would suggest you register early. And it is co-hosted by Chalmers University and the University of Gothenburg. Here are some resources for you to reach out. If you're not a member of RDA, we would love for you to become a member. It's free. You can do that on the webinar, on the website. And I want to thank you all for attending today. And thanks again, Mingfang and Layla. And that's it.